and we will be recording this. And if you have questions, remember to write them in the chat box. And take it away, Dennis. You have to unmute yourself. Dennis.
Here we go. How about that?
There, that's fine. Glad you're here.
Great. Yeah. Okay, so I'm talking about, and I probably misled Patty a little. I will be talking about damselflies as well as dragonflies. And what I won't be doing is giving an intensive program on Western Washington dragonflies and damselflies, as the title indicates. I misled on that. It'll be a more general talk about dragonflies and damselflies, and then toward the end we'll have more specifics about the local species. So anyway, here we go. The dragonflies are wetland animals, pure and simple. The larvae live in the water. Larvae, or nymphs as they're called, live in the water, anywhere from a beautiful pristine mountain lake like Tukwala Lake up here in the Wenatchee Mountains to a storm retention pond here in Redmond. And both of these have about the same number of species. They're really, you gotta give them water and they will come. Dragonflies and damselflies is kind of a long name to keep talking about them. So those of us who study them call them odonates. They're insects in the order Odonata, in the insect class. They're like all other insects in having a head, a thorax, and an abdomen, and 6 legs.
Dennis,
do you have your
seeing pictures?
No, we're not seeing your slideshow.
Oh no! Oh, that's really terrible. I don't know. I don't. Here you go, Zoom. Here as usual. So should I get out? I should escape the slideshow. Can you see that? Can you see my screen at all?
No,
I see you.
Oh my gosh!
Just you.
Well, I did. I said share screen. I thought. Good grief! Can you do anything about that?
I think.
Oh, let me look in Zoom here. Oh, here we go. Here we go.
There you go.
Oh
You
boy. So far, I have not given a single remote lecture that didn't have at least minor glitches.
You're not alone.
Not too many major glitches. Okay, here we go.
Take us back to your original slide, please.
I sure will.
Enlarge screen, because right now we've got all your wallpaper and everything there.
There you go. You got it.
Got it. Okay. Here we go. So dragonflies, rainbows on the wing. That was a article in National Geographic, probably, I don't know, back in the 1940s about, and the first person I think that called dragonflies rainbows on the wing, and I've always liked that. Dragonflies, as I said, are wetland animals. You can, anywhere there is fresh water, generally you can find them, since their larvae are aquatic. They have to have water, and that's where the adults hang around as well. Anywhere from a beautiful, pristine mountain lake like this one, Lake Tukwala in the Wenatchee Mountains, to a storm retention pond in Redmond, both of which are delightful places for dragonflies. You get water, you get a lot of vegetation. That's all it takes. Dragonflies and damselflies is kind of an unwieldy thing to keep calling them. So those of us who study them call them odonates, after the order Odonata. And that order has 2 suborders. The damselflies in the suborder Zygoptera. Ptera means wing, ptera, zygo means yolk, so these have yoked wings. The damselflies are smaller and more slender. The forewings and hind wings are similar, look pretty much identical. The eyes are smaller and well separated by more than their own diameter, and most damselflies hold their wings closed like this. Dragonflies, on the other hand, anisoptera, which means unlike wings, are larger and more robust. The forewings and the hind wings are distinctly different. The hind wings are considerably broader than the forewings, very different than the damselfly situation. The eyes are larger, either touching or close together, closer than their own diameter, and the wings are held open. So you really want to learn about dragonflies, so you have to start in the water with the nymph or larva. This is one that is just molted. It hasn't developed the pigment on its cuticle yet, so it's basically transparent or translucent, and you can see the innards. And what you see is a system of tubes that are called tracheal tubes. There's the head, the thorax with the 6 legs, and the abdomen. And then the big back part of the abdomen is what I call the miraculous rectum. This is the end of the digestive tract, and it's fairly large. And so food taken in, let's see if I can get a pointer here. Oh, yeah, let's see, arrow. Okay, food taken in with the mouth goes through the sort of stomach area and out into the rectum at the end here, and then is excreted as fecal pellets. So that's the digestion part of it. Mostly it's absorbing nutrients from the food that's going through rather than actually digesting it. But it also has a second very important function, that's respiration. And the dragonfly can pull water into this rectum, this rectal chamber, and then take oxygen out of the water into its gills. And these are gills, all these frilly things here. And then the oxygen goes into the tracheal tube. So unlike us who carry oxygen in our blood, insects carry it in these actual tubes, basically like pure oxygen. And then when during respiration, they produce carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide goes into these tracheal tubes, and notice they go all the way out into the head, into the legs, into them, and then is expelled into the abdominal cavity here and out. So oxygen in, carbon dioxide out as the water goes in and out. So that's respiration. Because they can pull water in and out of this chamber very readily, they can actually shoot it out explosively, and that's the locomotion. They can actually expel water from the rectum and sort of push themselves through the water like a little jet boat. So it is a miraculous rectum. I have the copyright to that term, by the way. Okay, where am I here? Next. Okay, look at the side view of a dragonfly larva, and the very prominent part under the head is the labium. And this is actually jointed. Everybody can see the pointer, I assume? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good. This is jointed here, and it comes down here and then jointed again here, and then comes out here. So this is extensible. This thing that you see here could extend out from the head, and it's what they use to capture their prey. And here's a top view. Now this one has been extended out. It's labium, these are labial palps, and they open up, and you can see that a food item trapped in here is held in place by all these setae and bristles really very effectively. These are the antennae, by the way. Here's another kind. This kind actually has the labium. This is a preserved specimen with the labium out. You can see this one's really got armament there to capture something. It can push that labium out, and the labium goes out instantaneously. It can be shot out. It's almost got sort of a trigger mechanism that is held very tightly against the head, and this trigger mechanism is triggered, and it shoots out incredibly fast. Can you see me, by the way? So you can see.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
you see when I'm doing things. Okay, good. So here's another kind of dragonfly larva. This is a darner. This is the very common big blue dragonflies we see around. It's got a different sort of labium. It's a precision hunter. The others can shoot their labium out and sort of grab something that moves in front of them. This is more like a cat. It stalks its prey, and its labium is flat, and it's got big hooks at the end of it. And so they can move toward their prey, which can be anything from a little crustacean to another insect, to a tadpole or a fish even, and grab it like that and hold on to it. And then it's got mandibles, which you can just barely see here, and it chews up the prey with the mandibles, keeps holding onto it with the labial hooks and chews it up. These are damselfly larvae. They're rather different. Like the adult damselflies, they're much more slender and smaller. And instead of respiring through the rectum, they actually respire with these caudal gills or caudal lamellae. Lamella means a plate. There's 3 of them. And so actually these are all, so the water comes in here. These are actually tubes. It's just like in the dragonfly, water taken into these tubes, and oxygen taken out of it and circulated all through the body, and then carbon dioxide released through these gills. What you're seeing on the top, you've seen this repeatedly, are wing pads, and I'll talk about them a little bit. Here's a bigger damselfly, a spread wing here, with really large caudal gills, and they can use them. They're not quite as diverse as the dragonfly, but actually I should add that if they lose these gills, they can switch to rectal respiration. So they actually can still respire underwater even without the gills. But the gills give them another way of moving, just like the dragonflies. They use them like the tail of a fish. So they can actually swim through the water with these gills. They do it very effectively. So many, many insects, butterflies, moths, beetles, wasps, and bees, and flies, and some others have really a 4-stage life cycle. They have an egg. The egg hatches into a larva. The larva eats and grows, sheds maybe 5 or 6 times, each time getting larger, and then continuing to eat. Finally gets up to its full size, and it forms a pupa. This is a monarch butterfly caterpillar here. Forms a pupa like that. This is a chrysalis of monarch butterfly. And within that chrysalis that it forms around it, within that pupa, it changes into an adult. It completely dissolves in there, but leaves certain cells that are very important. And around those cells, the adult butterfly forms and comes out and emerges into a nice adult monarch butterfly. And that's characteristic of so many different kinds of insects. Dragonflies have short-circuited that. They don't have a pupal stage at all. They have a nymph or larval stage, and then the adult. This is a larval. I call them larvae. A lot of my friends call them nymphs, so I sort of use them interchangeably. They can be used interchangeably. This is a larva molting here. It's actually, its skin has split, and the next stage is coming out of it. That's this white thing coming out of this, shedding its skin essentially, and looking like this. And these dragonflies, after they hatch, are very, very tiny little larvae. They go through different instars. Each time they mold, it's called an instar. And all kinds of dragonflies and damselflies go through about 10 to 13 of those, depending on the species and the water temperature and some other things. So they mold 10 or 12 or 13 times during their larval life cycle. And this is white because it hasn't developed its pigment yet. If you see a white insect, it's very likely one that is just molted. Insects don't seem to have albinos at all like vertebrates do. The eyes are pigmented, which they need to see. And these are the wing pads on the back. These wing pads get larger and larger as the larva grows larger and larger. And when it gets full size, they're about this size. And then as the larva gets near to emergence, they start swelling up because the wings of the adult are developing inside those. So these are pigmented. These are common green darner larvae. That's our state insect, by the way, the common green darner, a very common one here. And interesting, shows how these two larvae raised probably under different substrates or over different substrates actually develop different colors. So most dragonfly and damselfly larvae are some shade of brown, but there are green ones, at least in certain species as well. So after a larval life varying from 1 month in the shortest time, which includes mostly tropical species that breed in temporary waters. These temporary waters are very warm, and they're usually very full of prey animals, crustaceans and insects and a lot of other things. And so they can develop really rapidly, and they go through all those molds, all those stages in just a month before they emerge from the water. On the other hand, in high latitudes and cold water streams, up in Canada, even Alaska, they grow ever so much more slowly. They may only molt a couple times each summer, and it may take them 5 years. And actually, some people think even certain species even take longer than that, possibly up to 8 years to get to the stage where they leave the water. And that's what this particular larva has done. It has crawled out of the water and it's ready to shed its skin and become an adult. But during that time, and I should go back, during the time, the last instar of this is actually, unlike the butterfly that goes into a pupa, this thing is changing into an adult within its larval skin. So as these grow older, over time, the adult actually starts forming within that. They continue to feed, they continue to crawl around the environment, they continue to avoid predators. At some point, so much of the inside is an adult stage now that they now have to start breathing air. They can't use the rectum to locomote anymore. They can't pull water in and out of it. And you start seeing them actually come to the surface of the water. You'll see their head sticking out, or sometimes even their rear end sticking out. And at this point, they've developed completely into an adult inside this larval skin. That's when they leave the water. And they hang up like this and wait for a while, sort of getting ready to go. And then the larval skin splits right here on the thorax, sort of like this, across here and down here, and out it pops. And this now has come out, the same species, has come out of its larval skin. This is the adult that's come out. This is the larval skin left over here. It's hanging here. These are the wing pads. Its wings haven't come out of the wing pads yet. These white tubes are tracheal tubes. They develop in the same embryonic layer as the cuticle of the outside. So they're actually molted every time they molt. So it comes out like this and it hangs there for a little while, sort of getting its muscles working. The leg muscles are getting to work, the jaw muscles, the mandibles are working, and pretty much stays in this position probably for several minutes or perhaps even many minutes. And then it reaches up with the front legs and grabs its head, or sometimes grabs the substrate and pulls the rest of the body out like that. So this is a different emergence now, a different species. This is in the pond in my backyard. And it pulls its body out and it just sits there again. It's got it, the muscles have to strengthen. It's hanging on here. And little by little, it's full of water, it's full of fluids. And these fluids are now pumped out into the wings to expand the wings like that. You get to the perfectly nice, almost fully developed wings here. Then those same fluids that were used to expand the wings are pulled back into the body and used to expand the abdomen, thusly. And so now this is fully expanded. It's starting to develop its color patterns. A four-spotted skimmer, very common species. And it'll sit like this. All this takes, oh, sorry. I don't know, there we go. All this takes time. And this emergence of this particular dragonfly took almost an hour. Just watching it from the time it crawled out of the water till the time it was ready to go away. And so it sits there like that for a while. And then it finally opens its wings and sometimes flies away immediately, sometimes can rest like this for further time. But if, say, a bird approached it or a potential predator, it could now fly away. And most of these dragonflies emerge at night, so you don't really get to see them. Certain kinds emerge in the daytime, and you can see them. Most damselflies emerge in the daytime, and you can see them. So if you go out to the wetlands during the day, you may see damselflies emerging. You may get to see this whole process, and something like that. We'll see a damselfly here with the adult has come out of it, and you can see, of course, that they're much larger than the larva. All that adult damselfly was really squeezed in there and has to expand after it comes out. There's two water bugs that are photobombing my photo. And sometimes these creatures, when they emerge, can be incredibly common. This is Bolson Lake in the Okanagan in eastern Washington, where a very common species called the northern bluet is present, I suppose, by the millions in the water in the lake. And they emerge sort of simultaneously in the spring. They all develop the same during the winter, and they're ready to emerge at a certain time. And when the first warm weather comes in, say, late May, bang, all they come out of the water. And they may continue to emerge for some time after that. And these are all young, very young ones. They haven't even got to full size, many of them. And here, for example, is one that's just in the process of climbing up. And when they come out like this, and they're very soft and almost colorless, they're called tenerals. And tenerals, you often see tenerals at the water. You may flush them if you're walking along the edge of the water. A dragonfly has emerged from someplace there, and as you walk around, you disturb it and it flies up in the air. It'll be a very fluttery flight, almost impossible to escape from birds at that time. Just basically, they just fly away from the water where they have to mature. It's a time of very high mortality, probably the highest time of mortality in Odonata, because they are so soft and vulnerable. Predators can catch them easily. If you get a windstorm or a rainstorm, it can kill hundreds or thousands of them. The entire emergence from a lake on a particular day can get foiled by bad weather. Birds love them at this time. In eastern Washington, red-winged and yellow-headed blackbirds pretty much live on odonate tenerals emerging from the water. That's what they feed their young in May and June when they're breeding. So you'll find both of those species at very highly productive lakes where they feed so much on emerging damselflies and dragonflies. After they've emerged, they leave behind this cast skin, which is called an exuvia. And you can go around marshes and lakes and ponds and streams and rivers and find these. And actually, if you know what they are, you actually know who lives there just by finding these cast skin. Here is from a pond nearby. And there are two species here. You can see they're different. Magnuson Park, by the way, in Seattle, where I've spent 10 years surveying the dragonflies. This is two different species here, and I know what they are because I know what lives there. And people have done a tremendous amount of work censusing dragonflies, not so much damselflies, they're a lot harder to identify, but dragonflies anyway, just by collecting large numbers of these exuviae around the shore of a lake or the bank of a river, sometimes in a canoe or kayak, and then bringing them back to the lab and identifying them. After they emerge, then what? The immature, they then go from tenerals, and within 24 hours, they probably become something like this. They don't have that really, really soft teneral state anymore. They can fly, they can escape predators, they can feed on smaller insects, but they're sort of dull. They're in what I call an immature stage. They don't have their mature coloration. They're not ready to breed, not ready to reproduce at all. This may be a lengthy period. This is a kind of spread wing, and some spread wings take up to 2 months in this immature stage before they actually attain maturity and go back to the water to breed. Most of our dragonflies and damselflies here take maybe a few days to a week in this stage. What do they do when they're out there? Well, they have to warm up. These dragonflies, now these are adult dragonflies, they're mature ones. The left photo is an aspen trunk that I photographed at Edmonton, Alberta in early June some years ago with one particular kind of dragonfly collecting on the sunny side of the trees, basically just to warm up in the morning. They are what we call ectotherms. Their body temperature depends on the air temperature. So if the air is cold, they basically can't move. They can't fly, they can't basically move, they can't feed, they can't avoid predators. So they have to warm up. It's really important to them. And they go on light surfaces because the light surfaces reflect the sunlight and actually sort of warm them all over. And the right photo is a friend of mine, Jim Walker, is showing his trees. These are autumn meadowhawks that landed on his white shoes and white socks, basically for the same reason, just to warm up on an early October morning. But they also have to cool down. Again, being ectotherms, they take their temperature from the air, and if it's too hot, it can actually denature proteins and kill them. So when they're out in the sun in midday, many kinds of dragonflies, at least in this family, the skimmer family, point their abdomen straight up to the sky, straight up toward the sun. This is called obelisking. And especially in Eastern Washington, where it's a lot hotter than it is over here, you can see this in the summer. Some dragonflies can't obelisk, and so they hang their abdomen down, again, reducing the amount of sunlight hitting their body, just to not warm up too much. Dragonflies have superb vision, the best vision probably of any of the insects. The compound eyes of a common green darner have 14,000 simple eyes, which are called ommatidia, ommatidium singular, ommatidia plural. Each of these ommatidia looks like this. Here's the cornea. One of these tiny, tiny dots here, or you can see here, they're little hexagons, represent that. It's got its own lens, it's got its own receptor cells, and then this then goes to the central nervous system. The nerves come out of that and go to the minuscule brain and interpret what the dragonfly is seeing. Damselflies, as I said, have their eyes separated. The damselfly with its much, much smaller eyes still function the same way. You can see some of the other structures on the head of this. You can see the ocelli. There's 3 ocelli, singular ocellus, and they serve, apparently they serve sort of to keep the dragonfly or damselfly level. They can detect the horizon. So they're very important in keeping the head level and for a level flight. They can move their body all over the place, but they tend to keep their head level when they're doing that. They have a very flexible neck. The antennae, which are very important for smell in so many insects, seem to be more of a thing to detect air currents in dragonflies. So they can be sitting still and actually know which way the wind is blowing, for example, and maybe even something about its speed from the way the antennae are stimulated by the air. They have these big spines on the legs to capture prey. They're masters of the air. I think they're the best flyers of the insects. All 4 wings move independently of one another. This is a single paddle-tailed darner here, photographed from the front as it was hovering. So these are just a whole bunch of photos taken as it was hovering and just showing all the different wing positions. And the front and rear fore and hind wings move quite independently. And that gives them a tremendous versatility in flight. They can fly really fast. They can fly slowly or much faster, depending on how they flap their wings. They can hover in midair. Many, many kinds do that. They can't fly backwards, but they can very easily jump off a perch and go backwards briefly before they turn around. There's a damselfly hovering. This is a tropical species in Mexico, threadtail. Many damselflies hover. Again, if you go out to the ponds and watch them, you'll see them hovering over the water in one place, either looking for food or looking for a mate, but very, very adept at doing that. And again, you can see the front and hind wings are moving very differently here. This is probably the supreme flyer, the wandering glider, a very rare species in Washington. It's a tropical species that just barely gets up into our state. Occasionally they're seen here, but these it's a worldwide species. The only worldwide dragonfly, occurs around the world in the tropics, penetrates moderately high into the temperate zone, has been seen at ships 1,000 kilometers from the shore. So they're flying over the oceans. And you can see the hind wing are very broad, and they fly sort of like an accipiter hawk. They flap several times and then glide. And this is a really good glider because of those broad hind wings. And so this insect can fly from, and this has been documented, can fly from India to the Comoro Islands to the coast of Alaska during migration. It's a migratory species. And surprisingly, many dragonflies migrate, and I'll say something about that a little later. This is a close-up of one of those wings. They're pleated like an accordion, which you can see the veins, all these linear veins here along here, and the cells on either side of those go up or down here like an accordion, which strengthens the wing tremendously. If it was absolutely flat, it would tend to flutter. But this slight change in direction of the cells really makes it a very strong wing. We're still not sure of the function of these spines. All dragonfly wings have them, but they're still a puzzle. It's exactly what's going on. There are microspines on dragonfly wings that they've actually found repel bacteria. Bacteria that would land on a wing, land on these smaller spines and actually get stuck to them. And when the bacterium tries to move, it tears open its own surface. And so they've actually tried to put some of that knowledge into use, making antibacterial surfaces. All dragonflies are predators. There's not a vegetarian among them. They eat other animals, eat other insects. This is a damselfly that's just caught a leafhopper here, and it's chewing it down. You see the sunlight has caught one of those ocelli on the head. You can also see how hairy odonates are. They look like they're pretty smooth when you just glance at it, but they all just have lots and lots of fine hairs all over them, which probably are important in temperature regulation, holding in the heat that the dragonfly has generated by fluttering its own wings. Most of them have big spines on the legs. They fly, they catch their prey in flight, fly up and capture it with these spines and then bring it to the mouth. They all have mandibles like this. This is a very different species here. This is one of the dragonflies where the eyes don't meet, one of the clubtail dragonflies, smaller spines, but still perfectly good predators. And they chew up their prey with these big mandibles. Dragonflies can bite. They won't land on you and bite you, but if you catch them and are handling them and aren't careful, they will nip you pretty thoroughly. I've had them draw blood in me many, many times. Only the very largest ones, but they can do that. So if you catch one, just don't put your finger in its mouth unless you want to test that. But they capture prey. Most of the prey they capture is small, tiny beetles, tiny moths, tiny leafhoppers, just a few millimeters long. But as you get into bigger and bigger dragonflies, of course, the prey gets larger. This is an eastern pond hawk. It's a very common species in the East, and it's known to be a fierce predator on other dragonflies. Most of the times you see an eastern pond hawk with prey, it'll be a dragonfly or a damselfly. This is a very small dragonfly, one of the smallest eastern dragonflies that it's caught. But they eat all sorts of things. This great big clubtail dragonfly from Japan has caught a big cicada. This common green darner in Texas has caught a queen butterfly. Queen and monarch butterflies are poisonous to birds. They can't eat them, but dragonflies apparently have no problem with the toxins that insects have incorporated in their body to repel bird predators. Dragonflies can still eat them. So these green darner could eat a monarch butterfly, for example. But they're also prey, of course. They're just somewhere in the middle of the food chain, food web. There's a merlin with a darner in late summer. Probably in August, September here, I think among the major prey of merlins is dragonflies. The air is full of these big blue darners of various kinds, and the merlins are flying around, catching them in the air and landing and eating them. Kestrels eat a tremendous amount of dragonflies in migration. Also, in the river of raptors, this stream of migrating hawks that goes down through eastern Mexico in late summer and early in fall. The Mississippi kite, which is very abundant, feeds almost entirely on the migrating common green darners that are using the same pathway to migrate into Mexico in the fall. I was photographing this common whitetail on a rock in Oregon, and as I was taking its picture, this fence lizard came up and grabbed it. So lizards eat a lot of them. Spiders eat a tremendous amount of them, especially smaller ones, but even some of the bigger spiders can catch bigger odonates, not only tenorals that have just emerged from the water, but even absolutely mature adults like this bandwing meadowhawk. Other insects take them. Praying mantises eat them. This is a very large flame skimmer from Arizona here, and this big praying mantis has caught it. Robber flies eat a tremendous amount of dragonflies. Frogs eat them. I was doing research in Eastern Washington, catching a dragonfly and tying it to a fine line and dangling it from a fishing pole in front of other dragonflies to test their reaction. I was looking for a reaction of dragonflies to males and females of their own species, males and females of other species. And a couple of times I dangled the dragonfly too low, and a leopard frog jumped right out of the water and caught it like that. Fish eat a tremendous amount of them. You can, at a lake with clear water, you can watch dragonflies flying over the water, and you can actually see fish underwater tracking them. And I've seen bass leap right out of, like this one, leap right out of the water and catch a flying dragonfly. Birds are certainly probably their main predators, at least the ones that we see. Pied-billed grebes here nesting at Magnuson Park in Seattle. Fed their young a tremendous amount of dragonflies. This is a mature common green darner that this adult pied-bill has caught and has fed to its chick. And they catch a lot of the larvae. Of course, they dive underwater where the larvae are living and catch a lot of them. And I watched several grebe nests for quite a while at the same place where I'm doing the dragonfly surveys. And man, they were catching, most of their prey was dragonfly larvae. And apparently they actually had an effect on the abundance of dragonflies in the ponds where they were breeding. They have parasites too. They have internal parasites just like we do, but they have external parasites, ectoparasites, like water mites, Hydracorhina water mites. And when they get on the larva in the water and they just cling to it, and the larva emerges from the water, and the water mites quickly transfer from the larva to the soft adult, they actually stick their proboscis in that adult and hang on to it, and then are carried. So the dragonfly goes away from the water to mature, and it comes back to the water to breed, as this bandwing meadowhawk and spotted spreadwing have done. And then all the parasites drop off. So the dragonfly actually serves as food. The dragonfly actually serves as a source of food for the mites and also a source of transportation, moving them between ponds. It's a very old and well-established relationship. Most ponds have water mites, and you can very often see the adult dragonflies and damselflies with mites on them. These are especially dense. Usually they just have a couple. Sexual maturation. This is the spreadwing I showed you before. After being away from the water a week or two, it changes. It becomes brightly colored. The gonads develop. Probably the gonads developing is what makes all the transition, all the changing of colors in the body. And then now this comes back to the water to breed, all fancied up. You can tell the sexes apart, sometimes by just their color. Usually the males are brighter than the females. Not always, not in every species, but the males have a more slender abdomen. Females have a more robust abdomen because, of course, it carries their eggs. They can carry up to 500 to 1,000 eggs is their clutch that they lay over their breeding time. And they keep maturing new ones all the time. And these are the claspers, the terminal appendages that male uses to grab onto the female when they're mating. Larger dragonflies here, these darners that are common around here in the summer and fall. The male, again, has a more slender abdomen. It's got a bulge at the second abdominal segment, which I'll talk more about. Female doesn't have that at all. She's got a broader abdomen and an ovipositor at the end in darners. I meant to show you that second segment of this, a little bit enlarged here too. And then a damselfly is another example. Again, the female has a broader, fatter abdomen than the male. Damselflies all have ovipositors at the end where they lay their eggs with. And the males have these clasping organs at the end as well. Males usually are brighter, but not in every case. Many dragonflies are territorial. When the males are at the water, they actually defend a territory, very much like a red-winged blackbird would at the water. And if another male comes into the territory of that male, it's fought and chased out. Very, very bird-like in that. The male maintains a territory, basically, that gives it access to the females to come to the water. Larvae are in the water. Females have to come to the water to lay their eggs. So if the males want to meet a female, it's like a bar scene. They go in there and defend their territory, and any female that comes by, they have a chance to mate with. So they're very fierce in defending their territories. The big darners we see in the fall don't do that. They fly around and around the lake. When they see another male of the same species, they will chase it. But normally they're just cruising around looking for females that happen to be at the water. Damselflies, they're so abundant, they almost can't be territorial, at least the common kinds here, these bluettes. They just fly out to the water, males fly out to the water and look for females at the water and even around the edge of the lake. Some of these males have found females. They're hanging on to females and flying with them. You'll see how that goes. Sometimes they can be very, very abundant. This was a lake in the Caribou Parkland of British Columbia in July, but I have actually seen lakes in eastern Washington that were just about this full of damselflies. When a male damselfly finds a female and can capture her, basically lands on her thorax with his legs and bends his abdomen around and quickly grabs her around the neck here with his terminal appendages, and then lets go and flies with her and lands. His next step, the copulatory organ is in that second segment. That's what makes the bulge. The next step is transferring sperm, translocating sperm from the 8th segment where the sperm come out. The gonads are back here in the abdomen, and the sperm come out of a sperm tube here, basically. And the male actually takes them into his copulatory organ or penis, it can be called. And then that happens quite quickly. And then he releases that. And the next step is for the female then to extend her abdomen right up to that spot. And the male usually swings her vigorously around, so she'll contact him there, and that's where copulation takes place. That's where sperm transfer takes place. They stay like this for anything but for some seconds, usually more than some seconds. In some damselflies we have here, they do this for 3 or 4 hours. It's not that they need to do it for 3 or 4 hours, but the male is basically protecting the female from another male grabbing her and mating with her. That's a very big thing with dragonflies, is males harassing females to try to mate with them, because the sex ratio at the water is so uneven. The water is full of males, and when a female comes in, all the males that see her want to catch her. So if a male does inseminate a female, then he wants to protect her, so she basically doesn't mate with another male. If she does mate with another male, that male uses his penis to scrape out all the sperm that are stored in her seminal receptacle here and deposit his own. This sperm dislocation was never known in the animal kingdom until it was discovered in damselflies. And since then, it's actually been found in other kinds of insects and even vertebrates. Even rats do it as well. This is a male dragonfly filling his sperm sacs from the end of his abdomen. This is a photo a friend gave me. I have never seen this. I have studied dragonflies for 50 years. And even though every dragonfly before it mates has to do this, I have never yet seen this in nature. So if you ever see this funny behavior, you're seeing something that's very, very rarely seen. When most insects mate, they do it tail to tail. These cabbage white butterflies are mating now, and basically the ends of their abdomens are in contact, and they're copulating, they're transferring sperm, but they can't really do much like this. If a bird came after them, which way would they fly? Where would they go? How would they go? So dragonflies have done a much better job on that. They mate in they have these two contact areas, which is unique in insects. All other insects are in contact only in one place when they're mating. So these are, as I showed you with the damselfly, the male is holding the female here, and they're copulating here, making this big copulatory wheel, as it's called. What is the point of that? What's the point of that? Well, it's so they can fly united. They're facing the same direction, and they can actually fly while they're copulating. And this particular species copulates only in flight, never landing, and it does it for about 15 seconds. And that's all it takes to transfer all the sperm to fertilize this female. And by the way, she's not really fertilized at that point. She's just had sperm transferred into her. What she does then is produce eggs, and those eggs travel past her seminal receptacles, and she fertilizes her eggs herself with the sperm given to her by that male. So these are the appendages at the end of a dragonfly here, 2 above and 1 below, a damselfly here, 2 above and 2 below, that they hold on to the female with. The dragonfly grabs the female by the head. The inferior appendage is pressed right down on her eyes here. The 2 superior appendages are behind her head. That's a very, very solid hold there. And so they can fly around her easily like that. And then she's copulating with them up here. Damselflies do the same thing, except on the thorax. The superior appendages are onto the mesothorax that holds the wings and legs. The inferior appendages are on the prothorax, this little sort of neck-like structure. The 2 of these together make up the full thorax. And once they've hooked up like that, they can fly around like that. And this is called in tandem. These damselflies, these bluets, are in tandem, males holding on to females. Not all the males are hooked up, as you can well see. A lot of these males are, if you can give them emotions, they're probably envious, jealous of their buddies here who have females and are going to be breeding. But some of them are actually diving in. This one is diving in, trying to break up a pair. It's really an intense mating system, an intense mating game in dragonflies because of the way because they do it at the water, because the sex ratio is skewed. But they mate, and the female has the sperm that she fertilizes her own eggs with, and then they lay the eggs. And this is called endophytic oviposition. Endophytic means, there we did it again. Endophytic means within a plant. And so she is actually pushing eggs into the stem with her ovipositor. And these are doing the same thing in a rotten log in a stream. Actually, 3 different species, this is one, this is one, this is one, have gathered together, related species, all laying eggs in the same thing. Notice the males are holding on to the females. In all these cases, if they didn't, another male would come along, grab that female, mate with her, eject the first male's sperm, scrape it out actually of her seminal receptacle, and replace it with his own, or actually down here. They don't all do it in tandem. There's some damselflies oviposit by themselves. These little fork tails, which you can actually see around here, little tiny blue-gray damselflies laying eggs by themselves, actually apparently don't need the male to protect them. If a male of their species flies at them, they will actually bite him. They'll fly up in the air and chase him away. So they've got a different system going. Here's a dragonfly laying a darner laying her egg. You can now see this sharp point of the ovipositor here. The eggs are traveling out that and actually injected into the stem here. And this is above the water. And then many other dragonflies, all the skimmers and the clubtails and all the others that we have that don't have ovipositors, use exophytic oviposition. They lay their eggs just in the water. So here's a female blue dasher, a common species here, hovering over a bunch of duckweed, and then splash, she just pushes her abdomen down in it and releases a whole bunch of eggs. Here's a pair of cardinal meadowhawks, another very common species here, sorry. And they're in tandem. He's holding on to her and keeping her. Now he is protecting her from other males, and they will then fly over the water, hover in one spot, and do the same thing and drop a bunch of eggs in the water. If this seems to be a good spot, in other words, these pair of dragonflies has not been eaten by a fish or a bird or something, they will attract others, and you'll get a whole bunch of them laying their eggs in one place. But all this has to come to an end. Dragonflies die like all living creatures do, and they fall to the ground when they die, and the ants get them, or they fall to the water, and water striders get them. I put this here to remind me to tell you, the larvae I told you live from a month in the water to 5 or maybe even 8 years. The adults live a much shorter life. So a larva that may have been in the water a whole year developing produces an adult, emerges from the water, produces an adult that may only live a week. So our damselflies, often the adults live only around a week or 10 days. The bigger the dragonfly is, the longer they live. But the longest living dragonflies here probably don't live more than 6 weeks. In lower latitudes in the tropics, there are dragonflies and damselflies that can live at least up to 3 or 4 months. They actually go through the dry season as an adult. They emerge in a wet season, go through the dry season as an adult, and then lay eggs in the next wet season. But not up here. We have much shorter lived dragonflies. But they leave their eggs behind them, and the eggs hatch into tiny larvae, and the cycle is renewed. So here's some sort of more, some of the really neat odonates of the world that I like to show people, because I've actually collected and photographed them all over the world now. Here's one of the largest dragonflies and one of the smallest dragonflies together at a lake in eastern Australia. And not all dragonflies are bigger than all damselflies by any means. There are very tiny dragonflies, there are large damselflies. The lower one, the damselfly, there are some much larger than that. The largest of all weren't true dragonflies. They were a group called protodonates. They had the same ancestors as dragonflies, but they were a different order, and they were big. They were in the period where the giant amphibians inhabited the coal swamps and the Carboniferous and flew around, and boy, would I like to see one of those. If they come up with a really good time machine, I'm going back. So this is a common green darner, one of our largest dragonflies in comparison. We don't know for sure what they did. They probably were predators. Their mouth parts weren't even as big as the mouth parts relative as a regular dragonfly, so they may have eaten just very, very tiny other insects. They vary a lot in shape. These are members of the skimmer family, one from Europe, very common, very broad abdomen. Same family, a different genus, one in Southeast Asia. That's a dusk flyer. They hang up in the woods in the forest in the daytime, and they probably look like a vine hanging down rather than a dragonfly body. They vary tremendously in color. These are dancers, a single genus of pond damselflies or stream damselflies. Just 5 species in Mexico, showing the range of color in a related group. We don't have quite that range around here. But some of them are just really spectacular in color. A dancing jewel, smallish, well, actually a fairly large damselfly compared to the ones we have here. The only damselflies in the world that have the abdomen shorter than the wings are in this family. But this one, the male hangs in front of the female, dangles his legs down in front of him, puts them all together. So what she sees are 6 of these white things in a row hanging down from him. And then he rocks them back and forth. And that is courtship. Most odonates, not many odonates practice courtship. Mostly the male just grabs the female when he sees her. But there are several families of damselflies in which the males have to convince the females to mate with them by actually courting them. Some dragonflies, damselflies, have beautifully iridescent wings. These wings look clear until the sun gets on them, and they flash blue in the sun as they're flying around. Very large damselfly. Here's a genus of dragonflies from Eastern North America. Just shows the variation in wing coloration that you can have in a group, from almost clear to really brightly marked. This one's called a Halloween pennant. I should add, by the way, that a colleague and I gave common names to all the dragonflies of North America. And then I proceeded to give common names to all the dragonflies of Mexico and Central America. And a colleague of mine and I are now working on English names for all the dragonflies of the world. And since there's a heck of a lot of them, it's a big job, but it's fun. It's a lot of fun. That's a name that I made up. That's a very common species in the Amazon basin. Just these dragonflies land on a stem and wave their wings around. Presumably that's a territorial display. The only dragonflies I know to do that. They wave them up and down. It's just amazing. And then there's these beautiful sapphire wings, small dragonflies that hold their wings closed when they don't want to be seen and open them when they do. They display with their wings. There are several species very common in South America. They look like little bits of the sky flying around a pond. And this damselfly has clear forewings and colored hind wings. And the hind wings are much shorter than the forewings. The forewings are out to here. And it actually hovers, this one's landed, but they hover in the air in front of the female, fluttering with their forewings and just displaying their hind wings like that. I mean, who could resist that? Another member of that jewel family from Java, there's lots of different species of these in Southeast Asia, just unbelievably colored. The wings with all sorts of metallic spots on them. And again, when they fly, these spots just glitter in the sun. Again, they court females that way. But they're not all brightly colored. There's plenty of dragonflies that are camouflaged, like this 4-spotted skimmer sitting here. You can barely see until you start picking it out. The head up here and the wings going out here. Or a gray petal tail landing on a pine trunk in Florida. This is a very primitive dragonfly that's quite locally common in the Southeast. And I've always had a soft spot for them. But you walk through the woods in Florida where they breed in seeps, I guess, in little seeps, shallow water spots in the forest, and you just don't see them at all. You walk by a tree and all of a sudden one of these flushes from the tree that you didn't even see as you were heading toward it. Let's look at odonate diversity. How am I doing for time, by the way?
Fine. Keep going.
Okay, still doing okay. Odonate diversity, 6,317 described species. When I started studying dragonflies 50 years ago, there were about 5,000. So in that interval, 1,300 more have been found and described. And my own collection has quite a few undescribed species that I just haven't had time to do anything with, and many collections do as well. 462 in North America, north of Mexico, excuse me. 82 species in Washington. We're not a very rich state in dragonflies here. The really rich states are in the east. Rhode Island has many more dragonfly species than Washington. More aquatic habitats in the east, less problems from glaciation, apparently. When the glaciers pushed south, they actually pushed all the fauna in the eastern North America down into Mexico. And then when the glaciers receded, they came back up. The glaciers in the west, we had a lot of dry areas here. And so it actually wiped out a lot of aquatic creatures. When glaciers came down, they didn't have any place to go. So that's why we have a much smaller dragonfly fauna in the west. 60 species known in King County, the most in the state, I think entirely because I live here. I think if I lived in one of the other counties, that would really up their number. But I have studied dragonflies all over the state for quite a few years. 26 in Island County. It's not a very well-known county, really. I've visited a fair number of times and found that many dragonflies there. And a few other people have sent me photos of others. Mary Jo Adams, who lives up north there, has been really good at finding new dragonflies on the island. And I think there must be more than 26. Here's the flight seasons of Washington Anisoptera, the dragonfly, Zygoptera, the damselflies. You can see, if you want to see the most of them, you look around mid-July to mid-August. That's the best time. The first ones emerge sort of toward the end of March, not every year, depending entirely on how the weather is going. I usually don't expect to see any until April, and even then only a couple species in April. And they're really abundant, all diverse, all through the summer, starting to fall off pretty well in September and October, all the way down. And there's still a couple species flying in November, and we've even found one at the beginning of December. So let's look at some of those species. Common Western Washington lowland odonata. Spread wings are larger damselflies that hold their wings out. The emerald spread wing is probably the prettiest one with beautiful emerald green body. And these, by the way, these are all in Island County. They're bluettes. The bluettes are the little blue damselflies that can be very abundant at the water. The Thule bluette has much more black on the abdomen than the northern bluette, easy to tell in the field. Females are much harder to tell apart. These are all males. Two kinds of fork tails, black abdomen with a blue tip, unlike the bluettes. One has stripes on the thorax, the other has spots. This is probably the most ubiquitous odonate in Washington, the Pacific forktail. If you dig a pond in your backyard, they will probably come colonize it. Much prettier damselfly, much less common than Western red damsel, but it's known from Whidbey Island. It lives in sort of boggy stream areas. Blue-eyed darner, there's a whole bunch of darners, 10 species of darners in Washington. The blue-eyed is a very common one throughout the summer. Bright blue face and eyes, you can't miss it. Paddle-tail darner replaces it a little later in the summer. The blue-eyed flies around and around ponds. Paddle-tail darners hover over the pond. If you see a male darner hovering, it's probably either this or a closely related species. Nowhere near as brightly colored, a dark sort of turquoise eyes and a whitish face. But again, there are 10 species of them. Common green darner is very common everywhere. That's our state insect, unmistakable with a green thorax and a blue abdomen. Females are much duller, greenish or brownish abdomen. Easily seen when they're ovipositing because they oviposit in tandem. Our only darner that actually lays their eggs with the male holding onto the female. The other darner, in all the other darners, the females tend to oviposit in dense vegetation, so it's harder for the males to see them. The males have to hunt for them. In the green darner, they oviposit right out in the open, and so this female would be disturbed constantly by other males if this one wasn't holding on to her. There's a family called emeralds that have dark bodies, green eyes. The only one so far reported on Whidbey is the spiny basket tail. It's very interesting. The females have a big subgenital plates here, big prongs under the abdomen, which hold a big ball of eggs. You actually see them flying around with their abdomen tilted up and with a big ball of eggs at the tip of it. These are they lay egg strings. They splash their abdomen in the water and leave behind a big string of eggs, which then swell up, the gelatin swell up to protect the egg. So you see something like this where there's basket tails. Then all the rest are in the skimmer family, and the common whitetail is a very common one. The males, when they're fully mature, develop this, what we call pruinosity. It's a waxy substance that's deposited on the abdomen that turns them blue, even in the wings, blue to whitish. And the males have black bands across the wings. Females are very different looking. They don't get pruinose, they don't get whitish like that, and they have 3 spots on each wing. So that's the most sexually dimorphic in wing pattern of any of our dragonflies. 8-spotted skimmer, another very common species. This is one you'll surely have seen around lakes everywhere with the big showy black and white spots on the wings. Again, this is pruinosity, this waxy substance that's deposited as they become more mature. 4-spotted skimmer, less common, but just as beautiful, more in sort of boggy northern sorts of lakes, not such warm lakes. Very common species all across the world. This is a whole Arctic species. It actually just as common in Japan and Russia and Germany and England as it is in Canada and northern United States. Blue dasher, another very common one. The mature male gets entirely blue with bright green eyes and a white face. Females are striped, very different looking. Note that the young males of many of these dragonflies look exactly like the females when they're young, but they develop this color, and the eye color changes as they mature sexually. We have another blue species, the western pond hawk, which has dark turquoise eyes and a greenish face. different from the blue dasher in that. And the female is green. This is the only sort of moderate sized green dragonfly you'll see in Washington. Again, all these are on Whidbey Island. Cardinal meadowhawk, I've showed you before, our brightest red dragonfly by far, very common at lakes all over this area. Variegated meadowhawk is an interesting one. It's a migrant. I should have said the green darner is a migrant. I meant to say that. Variegated meadowhawk is a migrant. They come up here in the spring from the south. We don't know where from. They winter in California and Mexico, come up here in the spring. So you see them at the ponds early in the spring. You never find one that emerged. You don't find the larvae have emerged in the spring. These are actually migrants that show up here. Same with the green darners. And this one has yellow spots here and a variegated body. If you go out to the coast in August, if you're lucky, you may see huge migratory assemblages of this dragonfly moving south along the coast. Very commonly seen in Oregon, a lot less common in Washington, but I have seen it at Grays Harbor and Willapa Bay. Just an absolute spectacle. Hundreds of dragonflies moving past you heading south. It's really cool. Striped meadowhawk, another very common species. This breeds in temporary ponds. So it actually lays its eggs when the pond is dry in the fall and late summer, and then the winter rains come along and fill up the pond, and the eggs hatch in the spring and develop into larvae that emerge as adults, that mature, that come back to this dry pond. They somehow know where an area is that's going to flood again, and they lay their eggs there. They drop them. They don't touch the water, drop the eggs right from the end of the abdomen. A common species, and if you watch for them, you can sometimes see them doing this. So here's my pitch. If anybody is interested enough and would like to have a list of all those 26 species that are known to occur in the island, and all my work has been on Whidbey Island. I've never looked at dragonflies on Camino. Perhaps you might even be able to find additional species. Feel free to email me at dennispauldson@comcast.net, and I will send you a list of the species. And then, of course, then you have to have oh, there's one more thing. Yeah. For those who want to leave the island, and I'm sure some of you do, all of you do, you can go up in the mountains and look for mountain lakes with sedges and reeds around them and see these beautiful mountain emeralds flying over the water, hovering in place over the sedges. And then there are like 5 species of these emeralds in Washington, all with dark bodies and bright green eyes. And you can go in the same mountains, much, much rarer, look for little seeps along streams, little boggy places. You might find a black petal tail. This is the most primitive living dragonflies are the species of petal tails. We have one of them in Washington up in our mountains, both the Cascades and the Olympics. They like to land on light colored rocks and light colored tree trunks. And if you wear light clothing, when you're where they occur, they actually will land right on you. I guess they think you're a tree trunk. Go down to the Columbia Basin, you might be able to find Columbia clubtails. There are many more clubtails out there in eastern Washington in those hotter places. This female here is munching on a damselfly as they're mating, notice. And this is one I actually discovered in Washington and at the Yakima River in 1971 and named as a new species. So it's a pretty interesting part of the world. And then you can come back to Western Washington. These are also in the east. And from Seattle south at the streams, some streams and rivers, you can find these beautiful river jewelwings, our largest damselflies. They're very common in the Black River south of Olympia, but they're also in some streams around the east to the east of Seattle and further south. And they're fairly common in some places in the Columbia Basin. And here's how you can identify these creatures. Seattle Audubon, I think, still has copies of this booklet that I did some years ago, which is sort of a primer to the species, but full of photos and full of identification tips. And then much more recently, I came up with the book on dragonflies and damselflies of the West and a fellow book of the East. So if you moved east, you'd have one in the East as well. You can see this is a little bit bigger and a little more expensive. And then just a year and a half ago, I had this book published, which if you're interested in the natural history of the odonates, this is the book to buy because it's really takes you through a lot of what I've told you tonight in more detail with a lot more photos. All of these, of course, are available on Amazon.com as well. You can build your own habitat. This is our backyard when we moved in here in 1990. A year later, we had these guys come and dig a pond for us. And we lined it with butyl liner and filled it with water from the garden the garden hose here. And while we were filling it with water, I was so excited, a pair of cardinal meadowhawks came and started laying eggs in it. So I knew we had done the right thing. And we've really enjoyed that pond over the years. Here it is some years later. And we had to put an electric fence around it because the raccoons just loved it. And they would just tear up all the plantings, go in there every night. Finally took the electric fence down because we really thought it was unsightly. And then the pond developed a terrible leak, which we could not patch. So now it's completely empty. And next week, we actually have a pond company coming in and completely redoing our pond, making it better for aquatic critters and birds, I think. So we have these paddle-tail and shadow darners coming in, hovering over the pond in the fall. I can look out my office window and see them. Dragonflies are fun. I've always loved catching them. And so do many people who get into it. You can hold them in your hands sometimes. Usually they'll fly away, but sometimes they'll sit still and kids just love them. And if any of you have ever taken a class with Bob Pyle, butterfly guy, he will put a butterfly on your nose. I assume he still does that. And I told him that, yeah, dragonflies are much more exciting because you never know if they're going to bite the crap out of you. Odonatology, which is what I do. I have a collection of 60,000 specimens in the basement that I've built up over these 50 years. And the collection is going to the University of Florida in September. I think I'm gonna be pretty weepy about it because I use this collection all the time, but I knew eventually I had to donate it to a museum. And that's how they're kept in drawers and cases. Photography, I love nature photography in general. This is the first dragonfly I photographed. And this was 50 years ago in Everglades National Park in Florida, where I lived. And I actually, I'm so tickled that I have a photo not only of the dragonfly, but of me photographing it. You see, I think it's about a 57 or 58 Chevy back there. Dragons are fierce. Damsels are beautiful. And the end. Sorry I took so long. I get carried away.
Oh, we're glad you got carried away. Okay, Kathy, you want to get going on the questions?
Boy, does Paul have a lot of questions. I'll start out with just a couple of the really short things that you can answer really quickly, maybe, and then
Sure.
there's some more detailed things.
Oh, okay.
Why don't you not share your screen now, Dennis? Okay, so we can see
okay.
you.
Let me see. That's the fun part. Oh yeah, go into Zoom here, I guess. No, so far I don't. Oh, here we go. Stop sharing. Got it. They make it ready.
Diane would like to know how many species you've seen at Magnuson Park.
21.
And Aaron was wondering what their sleep cycle was like, why on earth they even become prey because they have such great eyes. And then she found a website about dragonfly shaped drones.
Oh, absolutely.
So that was fun. You know, it's still in the chat if somebody wants to go grab that and look at it later.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. They've used dragonflies as a model for drones. They're making insect-like drones that can fly into small places and spy on people and find things and so forth. And the sleep cycle, they become totally dormant at night. If you flush one, which sometimes you do when you're walking through the woods or something, they'll actually sort of do like a bird may even do, just be completely confused, and they'll actually fly to lights, just like a moth flies to a light when that happens. When I've lived in places where there are dragonflies, I've had them come to my lights occasionally. And they're very good. They're good at escaping predators. I've watched red-winged blackbirds chase adult dragonflies over a marsh, and the dragonfly just outflies them basically, but they seem not to be able to outfly something like a merlin or a Mississippi kite when they're up in the air. And I should have added that herons catch a lot of them, everything from least bitterns to great blue herons. A heron sits still, and dragonflies aren't, they got a pretty tiny brain. They will actually try to land on the head of this bittern or green heron or something and just get snapped right out of the air.
And do the birds tend to eat just the mature ones, or are they also going after the
Well,
the freshly?
yeah, they do best on the freshly emerged ones, that's for sure. They'll, as I say, I saw a pied-billed grebe grab one out of the air even, which really startled me.
And so somebody was asking, they do or they do not migrate because they don't live long
Only a
enough,
few
right?
kinds migrate. In Washington, to our knowledge, only the common green darner and the variegated meadowhawk, the two I mentioned, that the adults come up here in the spring from the south somewhere, lay their eggs, the eggs develop during the summer, and they develop rapidly in a nice warm water in the summer, and they emerge from the water in the fall, say August, and immediately fly south. So there's basically two generations, one that comes north and their offspring that go south, and then their offspring come north and so forth. Not like birds.
So does that mean our darners are late emergent or long-lived? Sega wants to know.
Well, the green darners are late emergers. They emerge later. And some of our green darners actually overwinter as larvae. So we sort of have two different types, the migratory ones and the non-migratory ones, which have been tested and found to have no genetic difference whatsoever. Probably whether they migrate or not depends how fast they grow. If they get to a certain stage and emerge by a certain date, they migrate. If it's later than that, they just don't emerge from the water, stay in the water and emerge the next year. But anyway, those probably live a fair amount of time. There has never been one banded or marked like is done with millions of birds and really lots and lots of monarch butterflies, where somebody has actually, banded it in Washington here and picked it up in California 3 weeks later. So we don't know.
Sego also wanted to know if you have any ideas about why some are camouflaged and some are bright
colored. Well, I should have added when I said that females mostly are camouflaged because they're the ones laying eggs. They're the ones sort of putting their lives on the line, flying around the water there. And there's no reason for them to be bright. Males are bright for two reasons. Probably one is that, well, several. They're territorial. So a pond hawk will not mate with a female skimmer, 8-spotted skimmer, say, and so there's no reason for the pond hawk to waste time chasing away male. I'm getting this all confused, but anyway, the males are specifically colored to be territorial with one another, to recognize one another so they know who to chase, just like in birds in that respect. And damselflies are brightly colored, we think, so other males don't attempt to mate with them. So damselflies may have all been brown at one time, but the males then evolve this blue color, so other males won't try to mate with them. They're not very bright. They'll try to mate with anything. If you can, I did this sort of study in Eastern Washington. You can take female damselflies and paint them blue, and the males won't try to mate with them. You can take a male damselfly and paint it brown, and the males will try to mate with it. And these are damselflies that you're holding on a stick or something. So I did a whole summer of research on that.
Suzanne, can you unmute yourself and ask him your question about the death fading thing that you were asking about?
Yeah, I was asking about thanatosis, the death feigning that the females do, and I don't know if it's all species or just some species.
I don't. Yeah, I know a fair amount of. I personally don't call it thanatosis. It's not like a possum or a hognose snake does. When a female is attacked maybe by a male or maybe even by a predator, they will drop to the ground. They are not feigning death. They are just avoiding being caught. It's a really different thing than what a possum does when it's feigning death, or again, a hognose snake that turns itself upside down when it's feigning death. This female is just trying to get away from something, so she drops into the vegetation. And several people have published papers on this now, which I think are bogus. I don't think they really should be called death feigning, but I haven't written any response or anything like that. Because I see this all the time, and it's not in the same things that the persons wrote about. And I don't think it's death feigning. I think it's just getting out of the way.
Thank you.
Many people have said thank you and how wonderful this is. There's lots of more. I don't know how long you want to go on about.
Oh, I'm happy to. Sure, no problem.
Let's see if there's something else that, at this point, maybe if somebody has a question, maybe they can just make a noise, raise a hand.
Okay.
So, I actually do have a question. So, I put the question in the chat, but I have a picture of a dragonfly which landed on my hand, and I can't identify it. So, can you help me with that?
Yeah, you're going to show it to me?
Yes,
Well, I tried to put it on the chat,
Yeah,
but I
but-
couldn't do that. Can we
Share
share the
screen.
desktop?
Yep,
Okay.
you can.
Um,
So, and here.
Oh,
it is.
there it is. Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. There we go. That's an immature. It's one that is just emerged from the water, so it hasn't colored up yet. Is it from Eastern Washington?
No, it
No.
was from South King County.
South King County. Well, it looks, it's probably it's a California darner. It's the earliest dragonfly to emerge in the spring. This is about the only dragonfly you'd likely to see in April. And they emerge from the water and they immediately leave the water and go flying around in upland areas and meadows and forest edges and stuff until they mature and get their bright colors, which would be actually pretty blue eyes and a fairly bluish face, a yellowish face maybe, and big blue spots on the abdomen. So it's a California darner for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sharing the desktop.
Awesome. So are you saying that that dragonflies and damselflies have only had Latin names until recently? Is that?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, when did you start doing that?
Well, recently in this case is the 1990s, so that's not so recent. A friend, this colleague of mine and I, he actually wrote the first field guide to dragonflies back in 1977. And it was called Dragonflies Through Binoculars. And there wasn't another one really until kind of the ones that there was nothing for the whole continent until the two that I wrote just not too many years ago, 10 years ago now. Anyway, so there were only scientific names, except a few species like green darners and, things that people had kind of noticed did have their own names, but I would say not more than a couple dozen in all of North America. And so we wanted to get everybody interested in dragonflies, the amateur naturalists in general. And so we were going to write a book. We could not find a publisher for it, but we at this point we just went ahead and made up common names for the 400 and some species that were in North America. And then we submitted that list to a bunch of colleagues who criticized it and changed some names or asked us to change some names. But most, I would say 95+% of the names that we coined were accepted. And he and I both actually, we went back and forth. We almost came to fisticuffs about it. Went back, no, that's a stupid name. You can't name that species like that. No, this is a much better name. But anyway, we're fine. We're still good friends. And we each ended up coining about half of those names. And so, yeah. And so then he put them in his book and I put them in my books and other people are in other books. And the thing we didn't plan on, we thought those common names would be used by amateur naturalists, people with a casual interest in dragonflies. They'd never get into it if they had to have scientific names, but they'd be happy to use it, like birders and so forth. But what's happened is that the vast majority of people now in dragonflies are, I guess, amateurs and use the English names. So very few people are using the scientific names, which is not what we planned. We wanted dragonfly people to keep using the scientific name because they're beautiful. They show relationships. They have interesting meanings. But anyway, so the world is changing. The paradigm has shifted. And now this other colleague of mine and I are going to do it for the whole world if we live long enough.
That's a great legacy. Would you like to see a picture that Mary Holland would like to share with us of a purple martin grabbing
Purple martins are just feed on mostly on dragonflies. Yeah, I've watched purple martin colonies in Seattle here.
You can do it, Mary. Go ahead.
Dennis, I'm not sure I agree with your statement about them feeding mostly on dragonflies, but I want to share a picture. This is a Craig Johnson photo
Oh, yeah.
of a young purple martin here. Look at her bands there on her legs.
Yep.
She was.
I possibly even have that photo. I think Craig sent me a couple with dragonflies.
Well, I think he asked you for help identifying this tattletale darner. And this was a young adult feeding. There's the baby in the middle picture.
Yep.
In my piling cavity. And I was surprised that you didn't mention purple martins as a predator.
I should have. There's so many birds. There's over 100 North American birds have been reported eating odonata. Purple martins are very important ones. I agree.
Okay, well, I'm a member, volunteer with the Western Purple Martin Working Group, and we had a student as her master's thesis do a little diet study.
Oh, wow.
Wasn't a very good study, and I'm not sure it was accepted for her
Thesis.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
But she found that the purple martins ate more bees and flies than they did odonata.
Yeah, they may well. I mean, the odonata are more noticeable when they come to the nest. That's part of it. And I've seen them eating a lot of wasps and bees too.
Have you?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I actually, yeah, indeed they do. And I think it's just hard when you're 50 feet from a martin box and the bird comes in, unless if it gives the food to the young pretty quickly, it's sort of hard to see what it is. But they can never give a dragonfly to the young quickly. That's a longer process always.
Well, then Craig Johnson can take a picture faster than I can blink my eyes.
Sure enough.
I have one other comment that Liz mentioned, that she had back east had sheep flies that were such a problem until, after they emerged a week later, the dragonflies came in and just, they weren't bothered by the sheep flies anymore.
That's right. That's right. When I've walked through some areas where there are mosquitoes, I've actually had dragonflies feeding around my head, taking the mosquitoes. And they've actually been seen them feeding around horses and cattle, taking deer flies.
Very interesting. Very good presentation, Dennis. I really enjoyed it. I know nothing about it, but I want everybody to clap. Everybody come on to your cameras so that we can give him a big round of applause. Yay. Thank you, Dennis. Anybody else?
I wish I could. The one thing I missed horribly was to have people responding to what I said, because when you have a live audience, people are smiling or they're nodding their head. Oh yeah, I knew that. Or there's so many different responses, and there's nothing like that in Zoom, which is such a shame.
Well, it is, but
At
we're
the same
trying.
time, I don't want to see anybody picking their nose or petting their cat on their shoulder.
I had to take my video off because my mouth was hanging open for all of those back bites. Just astonishing things we never knew. Thank you.
Anyway, I enjoyed it greatly.
There were so many things that I didn't know either, and it's just fascinating. So I really appreciate it, and I think all of us did appreciate it. Anybody else want to ask a question real quickly before we say bye? Okay.
Hey,
Dennis, thank you very, very much.
my
Thanks
pleasure.
very much.
From
Appreciate
the
it.
bottom of my heart.
Joe wanted to say something too.
Had one question for Dennis. This is Joe Sheldon, Dennis.
Oh, hi, Joe.
Were you working on dragonflies when we were together in 1969 in Costa Rica? You were one of the professors in the course I took.
Yep, I know. I sure was. That's why I was down there.
Okay, so at that point you were working on dragonflies. I was primarily working on green lacewings.
Yeah, well, just as a side. Oh, go ahead.
One of the field projects that we did was to look at dragonfly territoriality.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you remember it. Yeah. Princeton University Press is going to be publishing a book, The Dragonflies and Damselflies of Costa Rica, within the next month.
Excellent.
That I wrote, so with a colleague. So that's the culmination of those first trips to Costa Rica. I've been to Costa Rica maybe 7 times now, and finally got a book out of it. So, yeah. Anyway, thanks very much for inviting me.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you all for attending tonight. Glad to have had you all, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.